Something weird happens when you listen for the same kind of an event on the element and the container for that element. And it's important to also note that the game is also a container, even though we don't call it so, because it contains something. And what happens is so strange that I want to demonstrate it with this little game. So this is turning more into a lecture than a coding video, but you can code along if you want to. It's still the original file with the ball and the sprite, and in the CSS I just moved the ball to the center of the screen so I can see it. And I have another addition that I'll show in a moment. The game itself is very simple. I just have 3 functions, one to start everything, one for when the ball is clicked, and one to reset the ball. And when I click the ball, it disappears, and after the animation is completed, it reappears. In the start, I add a click event listener that calls the click ball function, and then I remove that event listener again, so it won't accept more clicks while it's disappearing. Then I add the disappear animation, and when that animation has ended, I call reset ball, where I remove the disappear animation. So, extremely simple. And now I want to expand on it, because I've created another fancy function, or a fancy class here called flash color, that changes the background color from yellow to orange to red and back again, goes through it 6 times, every time half a second. So if I add that to game, I should see something like flash color, like this effect. And I would like that to happen when the ball has disappeared. So I kind of want to inject it here between the clicked ball and the reset ball. So I'm just creating the other function, flash color. And I always start with the console log. And just to check that I can call that instead of reset ball, let's try it here. Flash color. And now reset ball is no longer used, but once we click it, once it has disappeared, it should say flash color. Excellent. So here we can then, as a good measure, remove the event listener. It's always good practice. And then we can add the flash color to the game. That will be our game, and class list add flash color. So this is the first step. Once the ball has disappeared, the game will flash. So then the next step is, after this, here, it should call reset ball when the flash animation is done. So I'm going to query select the game again, and then I'm going to add an event listener for animation end. That will be the flash animation ending, and that should call reset ball. And then always, as good measure, in reset ball, I'm going to remove that event listener. And I'm also going to remove the flash color class. And the reason that I'm not removing the disappear animation before here, that's because the disappear keeps being disappeared. As here it has animation fill mode forward, so it's always undisplayed until, but if I remove it, it immediately becomes redisplayed, and I don't want that before the flash is done. So this is correct. So now when I click it, it disappears, then it flashes, and then it did not flash. But we just had it, and it wrote flash color but it looked like, this is hard to tell, but it looked like it says flash color and then immediately went to reset ball. And flash color should take a few seconds. So let's take a look here. It's flash color reset ball. It looks like it's immediate. I need a stopwatch. And there is actually a stopwatch built into JavaScript, and it's not something that you need to use, but I'll just use it here to show you what's going on. And first I'm going to find something that works, the disappear class here, and then I want to say, okay, what time did that start? I'm console logging and then writing performance.now and a set of parentheses because that's a function. So this gives me the time of when it starts, and then when it's done it calls the animation end. And just let's give another console log of the performance now and see what happens. So I click it, it writes a number, and it has disappeared, and it writes another number. See, these two numbers, they're approximately 3000 apart. And if I look at the disappear animation, that takes 3 seconds. So these are milliseconds, and it took us 3000 milliseconds to go from clicked ball to flash color. And that's exactly as it should be. So nice. So I'm going to remove those lines again. And then I want to, when I add the flash color, I want to look at what is the time when it starts, and when I get the animation end event, what is the time now. So it's going, and boom, almost 3 milliseconds. That's hardly no time at all. An animation frame usually lasts 16 or 17 milliseconds. So these things are changing within the same frame. And this means that it's like we add the flash color class and then we remove it again within the same frame. And this was the same problem we had with the restarting animations, just the other way around, where we removed a class and added it again, and that didn't make a change. So we need to figure out how to fix this, but we also need to understand why is this happening. The reason it's happening is something called event bubbling, and basically it means that an event on an element bubbles up to its container and bubbles up to that container, and so on and so on. And perhaps it's easily explained with the click events, so I'm going to add some more click functions. One for clicking the, say, click the sprite, and one for clicked the container. And one for click the game itself. And then in the start function, I'm not going to call the clicked ball function, but on the sprite, I'm going to call the clicked sprite. And then I'm going to select the ball container and add an event listener, click for clicked container. And of course select the game. Add event listener, click for clicked game. So these are my 3 functions. And then what will happen when I click the ball? Try and guess, and then see. All 3 event listeners are called, and they are called in this order: click the sprite, click the container, and click the game. And maybe, if we look at it, it actually kind of makes sense, because the sprite is inside the game. So if I click anything in the game, I click the game. So if I click the sprite, I have also clicked the container and I have also clicked the game. Whereas if I just click the game, then it says click game. I haven't clicked the container or the sprite. I can't click the container. Yeah, I can just reach and click the container, and I can click the sprite, the container, and the game. So this makes sense for click events, and animation events and all the other events are exactly the same way. When the sprite animation has ended, that means that an animation has ended in the game. So when I added an animation end event to the sprite and another animation end event to the game, they actually caught the same event. And this, you say, but why? That shouldn't be... They are in different functions. Up here we add everything in one function. Yes. But remember, when I click, we first click the sprite, then we click the container, and then we click the game. So if I had moved this function, or this line here, add event listener, if I did that in the sprite, for instance, instead, and then I click it, I still get the exact same result. Because this event here happens first, this bit of code, and then the event gets sent on upwards up to the container, and then sent on up to the game. And this means that even though we added in another function, this function still is part of the event chain, so to say. When I click the sprite, then we are here on that line, and then I add an event listener on a container of the sprite. And since this function is waiting, or the event only gets sent on upwards when this function is done, so this new event listener will catch the same event. How do we fix that? One fix is to simply add event listeners on the container. But as we saw, there's this slight issue, for instance, with click events. If I click here on the ball, I have clicked the sprite, but if I click just next to it, I have clicked the container. And I would like to avoid that. I would like my game to say, okay, I shouldn't be able to click outside. This is not extremely important in our game, but I don't want to be able to click here and still get points. So on click events it might not be appropriate, but let's just say maybe it will work on animation events, because we don't really care about the boundaries of the animation. So let's try to restart the clicked ball here, and I'm just going to uncomment all this fancy stuff just because I don't think I need it anymore, but just to be sure. So when I have clicked the ball, I'm still waiting for clicks on the sprite, yes. And I'm adding animations on the sprite, but I'm waiting for them on the ball. You know what? I'm actually going to go all the way and wait for them on the game. And then I'm going to remove that same animation end. And then I'm going to add another event on the game, and I'm going to remove that. And that should be it. So my animation event listeners are now on the top container. So if I click the ball, it disappears, it flashes, and it reappears. And I can click it again, it disappears, and it flashes, and it reappears. The problem with this solution is that in our game we will have more elements. We will have more than one ball and more animations ending at different times, and we can't just have one function reacting to them all. So this won't always work. So if I'm undoing it, then I can try for another fix. Sometimes it won't work for us to just move the event listener all the way to the container. But since the problem was that the time was too short between the flash color and the reset ball here, maybe we could delay it somehow. When we tried restarting animations, we did this with the offset height. So that might do something. That might give us a bit of a delay. So let's see if we remove it, and no, it did not work. And of course the reason it doesn't work is that we don't change it twice in the same function. It's changed twice within the same frame, but not in the same function. So the browser's hiccup, so to say, isn't big enough. So we need to say, okay, I want to wait a frame. So maybe if we say we flash the color and then we remove the animation end flash color, and now we can add the class, and then we want to wait at least one frame before we add the next event listener. So we create a function here, just call it wait one frame, and that function would then add the event listener. Then we just need to say, okay, how do we call that function? We could do it like this, just call it wait one frame and see if that does anything. Click here. It didn't, because when you call one function from another, they're just called directly, still within the same frame. But there's this strange thing in the JavaScript where you can say request animation frame, and that tells us, okay, wait one frame and then call this function. So it's kind of an animation frame event, you could call it, and it just happens one time. So if I click it now, it disappears, and then it flashes, and then it's reset. And see, it took about 3 seconds. I click it again, it flashes, and it reappears. So if you can't fix the event bubbling problem with just listening on the container, maybe you can wait one frame with the request animation frame. This will require you to make an additional waiting function that just adds the event listener. And of course, if you want to use it again in other functions, you need more wait functions. So this is just the wait one frame. Maybe we should say wait one frame after flash color, so we know that we can use this function just this one place. That is the bit about event bubbling. These two fixes aren't the only ones, but I think they're the best ones for us right now. If you really want to know more about event bubbling, you can search for event propagation and event capture and stuff like that on the internet. But be aware, it's a scary world out there.